It's really cold this morning, freezing. So how does it feel visiting Japan as a Japanese American from Hawaii? It's a very interesting feeling because having grown up in Hawaii, my exposure to Japanese people, if they're not local, has primarily been as tourists and as visitors, and we sort of have a certain stigma and sort of stereotype about Japanese tourists when they visit Hawaii. But ironically now, I'm the Japanese tourist here. Whoa, what is going on? What is going on? I don't know what's going on. These birds are circling around. So first thing I want to mention is that feeling where you kind of look like everyone, but at the same time, not really. It's something that I think if you grew up in Hawaii, you sort of have an eye for. Like, you can tell the difference between a Japanese who is 100% Japanese, who grew up in Hawaii, versus someone who is also 100% Japanese, but they grew up in Japan. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the culture, maybe it's the diet. I'm sure it has something to do with all the spam and Vienna sausage that we tend to eat in Hawaii, but you can kind of tell this difference. So I think visiting Japan as a Japanese American from Hawaii, it kind of like makes you think, right? Like, how come we look so different, yet we're genetically, I would think we're pretty close to the same, and we're both 100% Japanese. It's really interesting too, because every time I've been in Japan, people look at me and they consider me like Japanese. They start talking to me as if I'm like Japanese, where I understand the language, and then pretty much as soon as I start talking, they're like, oh yeah, okay, this guy is gaijin, or he's a tourist. So I guess I still have that Japanese look, which I think is fairly interesting, because from my perspective, when I see someone who is a Japanese from Japan, clearly they look very different than someone who is Japanese from Hawaii. And I can tell that in Hawaii. But I guess maybe here, they assume that I am Japanese. And oftentimes, whenever we're out, my wife is the one who has to speak to them and translate what it is they're saying, because most of the time I just nod along and smile as best as I can, because I have no idea what they're talking about. Right, it's cold. The second thing that I notice is trying not to judge the Japanese people and Japanese culture based on my experiences being Japanese in Hawaii and what I think that means. Because growing up Japanese in Hawaii, I tend to think that we have a certain way of life. I mean, I think a lot of things carried over from Japan to Hawaii. Things like family, tradition, hard work. I think those things made it all the way. But there's also other things that growing up in Hawaii, we sort of pick and choose and grab from other cultures, and that's sort of where this Hawaii culture came from. So for example, one of the things that I noticed early on when I first came to Japan was I would look at Japanese people and how they're dressed, and I used to think, man, that's so strange. A lot of the men are wearing suits, right? They're wearing nice suits and shiny shoes to go to work. They're all carrying bags. And then the women are very much covered up. And as someone growing up in Hawaii, that's definitely not how we were raised. That's not our way of life in Hawaii. I grew up where Japanese guys were wearing aloha shirts like my dad, and women just kind of wore pretty semi-casual for work. And so as someone from Hawaii, especially someone Japanese, I have to remember that it's not so much using our way of growing up to judge Japan, because actually it's sort of the other way around, where the Japanese culture originated here, and whatever made it over to Japan, that kind of changed, and it became this mix and this hybrid, and that's the result. That's not the original. The original is here in Japan, not where I grew up. And it's a really hard thing to shake, because we have this island mentality in Hawaii. It's not just a Japanese thing in Hawaii, it's sort of this cultural thing. Oftentimes we think that our way of life is the best. And it's totally understandable. When you're as isolated as a place like Hawaii is, you just sort of develop that sort of mindset, that sort of paradigm or way of thinking, which is why I think it's great for people to leave Hawaii for a little while, and not just vacation, but to really go and to actually live there. It's one of the things that I quickly learned when I went to the mainland for college and I was living it on my own. And every time I come back to Japan, I'm further reminded that the way that we live our life in Hawaii isn't the only way. That there's an amazing society here in Japan as well that we can learn from. Things that'll broaden our perspective on our way of life, how we live our life, the way that we act and treat each other. Because the aloha spirit is absolutely amazing, but it's not the only place that is amazing. And it takes traveling to realize that. And the third thing is an appreciation for where I come from. I realize I'm walking on the wrong side of the sidewalk. Gotta make sure I'm on the left side here. It's really nice to be reminded of the culture where I came from. Because oftentimes we're so mixed up in Hawaii that we forget where we come from and really come from. Like, I'm proud to be from Hawaii, but I'm also proud to be Japanese, and not in some elite status way. I'm just proud that I know that my family, my relatives, a long time ago left this place. Well, not this place, but they left Japan and they traveled all the way to Hawaii to try to find a better life. By the way, these birds are really big. I thought minor birds were huge, but have you seen some of these crows? Oh my gosh, they're gigantic. We love superheroes because of their origin stories. And when I am back here in Japan, it reminds me of my family's origin story, where they've traveled by boat to Hawaii to work, to start a family and to try and do something with their life. My family, like a lot of other Japanese American families in Hawaii, started with the Issei, which is the first generation that came to Hawaii, and they worked in the plantations. Then there's the Nisei, and they're really that bridge between Japan and the American culture. They're really significant in our history because they provided that connection, particularly with businesses and the military in serving. And it's an incredible history that I can be a part of. And then of course there's my parents' generation, which is really the ones that were sort of shaking off the old traditional Japanese ways and have pretty much acclimated to just being American. And then there's me, fourth generation, Yonsei, where we're pretty much full-on American, and I don't know too many of my generation that actually speak Japanese anymore. Very nice. There's a lot of smokers here. What's really awesome is that my mom is very much into the family tree and the family history, and she's put that together for us. And it's awesome that we were able to connect with family in Hiroshima, which we're not visiting on this trip, but still it's really nice to know that that's where my family came from. And I think it's important to understand where your family comes from. Some people, maybe it's not a priority, but for me, I'm proud of the fact that my family a long time ago, my relatives, my ancestors, they just chanced it. They just came over here and they didn't know what was gonna happen. And maybe we don't have that much today with that type of courageous spirit that just chance them and let's see how it goes. But for my family, I'm pretty proud of that fact. So as someone who's Japanese American from Hawaii in particular, it's really awesome to be back here in Japan. And maybe to most people, I look the same as the people who are from Japan, like Japanese nationals, but clearly we're very different. And maybe this is just a talk on semantics, but it really comes down to identity. And I'm proud to be Japanese American, but I'm also proud that I'm from Hawaii, a very unique distinction, that even though I am Japanese, I'm really a Japanese person from Hawaii. Very different from a Japanese person from Japan. And I think it's great, and I think it should be celebrated, that there is this difference. Anyway, starting to get really cold. I think it's like in the 40s. You gotta remember, I grew up in Kaneohe. If it was in the 60s, we were freezing. So the fact that it's in the 40s, it's been a while for me since I was in Colorado, and I'm glad I even have this jacket here, because if not, I don't know. Last time we came to Japan, totally was not prepared, and I was freezing most of the time. So I'm glad that I got this jacket. So thanks for watching, and aloha.